your wide receiver Hail Mary higher and lower as well. My higher is, again, Mike Evans, going back to the well. I can go back to all the guys I said last week because they panned out for me, and I'm high on them again. Calvin Ridley, Zay Flowers, but I'll go back to Mike Evans the most. +7 ECR, wide receiver 16 against Chicago. He was a wide receiver 11 last week. All offseason, the Athletics subtly pumped that this was Baker's guy, and it sure looked that way. 95% of the routes saw 25% targets per route run, 30% of the total targets from Baker Mayfield, compared to 20% of the targets for Chris Godwin. And what's crazy is Mike Evans plays that big play, going streaking down the field, 12.11 average depth of targets, and yet 89% of his targets were deemed catchable. Baker Mayfield, everything's going to suck with him. I don't know about that. That was very impressive. 50% of the team's total air yards, 50% of the team's end zone targets, 19 PPR points last week. That type of usage I could get down with each and every week. It's a Chicago team that just got carved up by Jordan Love, who, looks good. But, 3 touchdowns for him. I think it's a great spot there for Mike Evans. I think it's also a great spot for both of your Chargers receivers. I'm +3 ECR on Keenan Allen, wide receiver 10. You don't need me to encourage you to play Keenan Allen. I'm sure you were starting him anyways, given 29% target share, 10.89 average up to targets. That's deeper than we've ever seen. Keenan Allen moved around the formation more often than ever before, 42% of air yards. This is a new vertical Keenan Allen, and he was thriving in the role, just barely missed a touchdown. Would have otherwise been a monster. Still scored 14 points, but was on the fringe of a 22-point day had he gotten to the end zone there. So love me some Keenan Allen, but I also love Mike Williams, my wide receiver 20, +4 ECR. So a fringe starter by most. I think you have to lock him into your lineup. Saw 50% of the end zone targets this last week, a 22% air yard share. Keenan Allen averaging more average depth of target than Mike Williams is really something I would never expect to see. He got banged up, Mike Williams, in this game, but did ultimately come back. I think this is the type of explosion atmosphere where he just dominates this pathetic Tennessee secondary. They gave up the most points to wide receivers last year, second most points to kick off this season with 40 points given up to those Saints guys, 18 catches, 262 yards, and a touchdown given up to the Saints wide receivers in that opening week. Beautiful stuff for him. And we were just talking about Puka Nacua as a dominant key pickup for this week. You picked him up. Let's get him in the lineup. I'm +9 ECR. He's my wide receiver 33 against San Fran. Just to reiterate, had you missed the waiver wire show, 42.9% target share, a whopping 15 targets, both highest in the NFL, tying Tyreek Hill as well. That was the most targets by a rookie wide receiver in week 1 ever. And the big thing, 43% of them were first read targets. That's more than Cooper Kupp ever had last season in his insane record-breaking year. He took 10 of those catches for 119 yards. Some of them were deep down the field. A lot of them were those layup easy targets. And that's what I love about him. And sure, San Fran, scary on paper, one of the best defenses in the league. No arguing there. But that actually might help Puka Nacua this week, given that they are a very zone-heavy coverage team. They specifically use a ton of cover 4 and cover 3. I'm shouting out Jacob Gibbs on Twitter here with some great metrics. Rams versus cover 4, Puka saw 5 of his targets against cover 4. Against cover 3, Puka Nacua saw 7 targets there. He is an absolute definition of a zone beater, a type of guy that is smart and savvy and knows how to sit in the right spots. And 33% target share in single high coverage looks as well, according to Football Insights. So a lot of the metrics point to the coverage that he dominates is what the 49ers love to run. And don't forget last year, the 49ers did give up the 10th most points to wide receivers. You cannot run on them, but you could throw on them. Last year, I don't think that's going to be overly different. Stafford slinging for over 330 yards last week, looking as good as ever. I think Puka Nacua, if you blew the fab to go get him in your lineups. I am all in on playing him this week. In terms of my lower, you'll start with Garrett Wilson at Dallas, my wide receiver 27 -9 ECR. Pains me to say it. I have him in multiple leagues with my second round target. Zach Wilson is back. If you've watched this show, you've heard these before, but let's remind you of the Garrett Wilson splits last year with Zach Wilson. 9 games with him, 8.8 fantasy points per game, averaged 3.7 receptions per game, and 49 yards per game. Did not score a single touchdown with Zach Wilson. Meanwhile, 8 games without Zach Wilson, 17.3 fantasy points per game. He was about to be Devontae Adams with Aaron Rodgers. This is so painful to see. Could Garrett Wilson be improved? Could Zach Wilson have taken a step forward? Maybe. He did connect on that nice touchdown. Went up and let Garrett Wilson do his thing, and that's what he's got to do. Maybe he becomes his binky and he just dinks and dunks, and yay. Maybe Aaron Rodgers' influence helps him to trust his receiver more. But against this ferocious secondary of the Cowboys, against the even more ferocious pass rush, I think Zach Wilson's going to be crapping his pants all night, and I don't want anything to do with it. It's hard to bench Garrett Wilson, but I'm 9 spots below ECR. And if you have a comparable option, Mike Evans versus Garrett Wilson, for example, a question I caught, I'm going Mike Evans 10 out of 10 times this week. I'm also benching Drake London at this point. Green Bay, wide receiver 37 in my rankings. That's -4 the ECR. Desmond Ridder, look no further than the fact that he only threw for 115 yards this last week, only 18 pass attempts. This is as abysmal of a pass high as you can find. London played 90% of the snaps and logged a whopping 1 target on his 20 routes for 0 receptions, 0 yards. Can't get any worse than that. I agree. But he's also facing Jair Alexander's shadow coverage, who locked down DJ Moore this last week. I think he'll do the same for Drake London. You're beating the Packers. It's definitely through the run where they're much, much more susceptible. And that's what Atlanta wants to do anyways. So I think they bludgeon them on the ground. And Christian Kirk, -11 ECR against Kansas City, my wide receiver 45. He only was restricted to 3 wide receiver sets, essentially. Outsnapped, out-targeted by both Zay Jones and especially Calvin Ridley, the new alpha of this offense, having a whopping 30% target share, 95% of the routes, just an absolutely dominant player. And Calvin Ridley, great to see that monster wide receiver 1 back and doing his thing. And it definitely came at the expense of Christian Kirk. With that limited usage, down to about 60% of the snaps, he ultimately only logged 1 target, 1 reception, 9 yards, had legitimately 0 catches through 3 quarters. It's bad. It's really bad. Now, against the Chiefs, who have been susceptible to slot receivers, if he's ever going to break out, it'd be in a game like this where there'll probably be more 3 receiver sets, chasing points. But I don't want to trust Christian Kirk in any lineups after that abysmal usage. I'd rather have Kendrick Bourne, only 33% rostered as we move into my Hail Marys. I think that jumps up to 75 or more % this week when he goes crazy once again. He's the clear-cut wide receiver 1 here. 93% of the routes last week, only 47% of routes for Juju. Saw team high Kendrick Bourne, 11 targets, 21% share. Mac Jones, as we talked about in my quarterback Hail Marys, 316 yards, 3 TDs, a league high, 54 pass attempts. 6 for 64 with 2 touchdowns for Kendrick Bourne. Like he always does, he delivers when used. It's ridiculous that he was in that doghouse all last year and goes to show it. Wide receiver 30 just 2 seasons ago when he was about a 60%, 70% route participation type of guy. He still caught 79% of his passes despite going 14.5 yards per reception just a couple years ago. He can absolutely ball, and you cannot discount Mac and Bourne's chemistry. Definitely worth a Hail Mary start, but should he be gone in your league? I'm way more competitive than that, Wolf. Well, how about the Texans wide receivers? Robert Woods, 7% rostered, and my personal favorite, Tank Dell, 4% rostered. I like both of these guys this week. We hinted at it earlier, but Noah Brown to the IR, opening up 76% of the routes, only 9% of the targets last week, but that's still a ton of routes being run by him. It's crazy that Tank Dell only ran 46% of the routes and saw equal targets to him. That's because he's such a better target earner. When he's out there, he gets the rock. He had 13% of the air yards compared to -5% of the air yards for Noah Brown, who was just getting dinks and dunks all day. So Tank Dell on less than half the snaps got more fantasy points, and I think already cited by D'Amico Ryans as the next man up in 3 wide receiver sets. Tank Dell was the guy that banged the table, CJ Stroud. I want Tank Dell on my team after our combine together. He loved the way he run routes. This guy was ridiculously open all preseason, both in games, throughout camp. So I love Tank Dell, a much more vertical element now joining this offense. And again, CJ Stroud's boy. So he's the guy I actually go to first as a streamer. I think he brings a little bit more of a ceiling, but safety would maybe be with Robert Woods. He had a whopping 10 targets, 6 catches for 57 yards. Pretty usable numbers right there. And I think the bigger takeaway for all of this might be they ran a whopping 72 plays, the Texans did, 54 of them passes. This is a huge pie. Wasn't the tastiest of pies in week 1, but against a Colts secondary, absolute joke. Maybe the worst in the league. According by PFF average grade, they are right there at the bottom. There's nobody here. So yes, Nico Collins, 11 targets. He's the number one guy, but right behind him, Robert Woods, and then that big play threat of Tank Dell, I think are both well worth your Hail Mary consideration. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.